Eskom has implemented stage 2 load shedding, which will last until this evening at 10 o'clock. The embattled power utility has attributed the extension to low diesel stocks at their stations. It's also cited a need to preserve its energy reserves. For more on this, we're joined by Professor of Sustainable Development at Stellenbosch University, Professor Mark Swilling. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. There seems to be no light at the end of the power utilities tunnel. Instead of the situation getting better, in the last 3 years, it seems to be getting progressively worse.
That's absolutely correct. The number of hours of load shedding last year was much higher than the previous year. Last year was a record. The condition of the power stations is not getting better. And what we need to understand is that Eskom is not mandated by government to procure new energy. That is up to government. So Eskom's hands are pretty tired. They can't really keep the lights on if their power stations are getting older and older and less reliable and more subject to sabotage, while government doesn't speed up the procurement process.
Now, in a short statement, Eskom says it's extending load shedding to preserve diesel reserves, which it's keeping it burning to keep the lights on, pardon me. And it's also said that they will continue to monitor the system because they're expecting a shipment of diesel on Monday, but warning that if the current burn rate persists, diesel will be depleted ahead of the ship offloading. What would this now mean for consumers?
Well, it's going to mean more load shedding and maybe even moving up from stage 4 to stage 5. So you know, there was, I can't remember exactly when it was, but the president was out of the country and cut his trip short to come back because we had moved to stage 6 load shedding, and that is very, very serious. Once it gets even worse than that, then we're facing a shutdown of the electricity system, and that could mean no electricity for everybody for 5 days.
And that could be a reality.
The worst scenario.
That could be a reality, pardon me, because, you know, there has been caution that, you know, at this rate, consumers should expect to have and experience full blackouts, moving to stage 8 even, because if we consider what's happened this year alone, so far there's already been 25 days of rolling blackouts. It really paints a frightening situation.
Only May. Last year there were 46 days if you add up all the hours into the number of days. So yes, it could be as serious as that. But what we need to understand is that these power stations are so old and have been so badly maintained and are also subject to sabotage, which cannot be predicted. So that at any moment in time, Eskom cannot actually tell you exactly which power stations are going to trip when. And so they live with a very, very high level of uncertainty, and that obviously is passed on to us. And that's the situation that we are facing at the moment. We're living in an extreme level of uncertainty, and what it requires is a declaration of some form of national disaster and a collaborative effort to face this fact. We've had load shedding for nearly 25 years now.
And also, there seems to also be an imbalance of sorts when it comes to dealing with the country's lack of generating capacity and also scrambling now to conduct maintenance. How do we then assess the performance of Eskom's fleet with this imbalance?
Well, the imbalance is caused by the fact that Eskom needs to close some of its old coal-fired power stations, which are the ones that are giving us the problem, as well as the most corrupt one, which is Tutuka. But it can't close any power stations until there is new generation capacity. And new generation capacity has to come online within the next 2 years. So you can't build a nuclear power station in 2 years. You can't build a coal-fired power station in 2 years, but you can build large-scale solar and renewable energy power. We need 10 gigawatts of new generation capacity on the grid within the next 2 years. And that will definitely bring load shedding to an end, for sure. And that will make it possible for Eskom to then gradually start closing the old ones that must be closed because they're proven to be unreliable, as well as properly maintain the ones that need to be kept going.
You make mention of a 10-year timeline, and from some of the interactions we've had with Eskom's CEO, what is it looking like in terms of a realistic plan on getting out of this mess?
Well, what we really need to understand is that and just to say, I said 2 years, we need 10,000 megawatts or 10 gigawatts within 2 years, and that is doable with a collective effort. So we can set ourselves a target, 2 years, end of load shedding, but it means making the big decisions around new generation capacity and storage now. It's doable. But when it comes to Andre de Ruyter, his hands are tied. All he can do is keep the lights on with a set of Skoro power stations that are just unrecoverable. There are some that are okay and are not so old, but there are too many that are just unreliable, unpredictable, and continuously trip. And the best thing and the responsible thing to do is to start closing them down. But you can't do that unless new generation is put on the grid. But Eskom doesn't control the decisions to procure new generation capacity. They're not allowed to. That is left up to the Minister of Minerals and Energy. It's his job.
You made mention of some of the sabotage, and we've heard over the recent months of police now speaking to a sophisticated syndicate which includes corrupt officials, police, and tracking companies. What would you believe could be the motive behind this alleged sabotage?
There's a couple of different motives from different types of groups. So there are the old state capture networks that are still there, and they have a vested interest in making sure that they can continue to loot. So that's one. Second, there is a new crop of criminal syndicates who are just out to strip and destroy as quickly as possible and get as much out. The state capture networks loot in a way that still allows the power stations to continue so that they can continue to loot. The second group is much more destructive. And then there's a group of ideologically motivated saboteurs who want the current leadership of Eskom to be thoroughly and utterly discredited. And then you have so-called experts appearing in the media who then say, Andre de Ruyter is not doing his job.
As you make mention of a 2-year plan, the proposal that you're putting forward, what does that then essentially mean for the consumer, the everyday consumer who needs to keep the lights on? I mean, we've just gone into a cold snap now, and not having power is really a serious concern. Also, considering the bigger picture when it comes to business and the economy, what are the shorter-term solutions in terms of day-to-day and trying to make ends meet?
I'm sorry to say this, but as an academic, I can say it. I don't have to tell the good news.
Yeah.
The bad news is load shedding will continue for at least the next 2 years, and possibly longer. It could be longer if the big decisions are not made immediately within the next 6 weeks. Within the next 6 weeks, the president could ensure that the big decisions are made by a consortium of powerful players who agree to collaborate. But in the meantime, sorry to say, but the households and businesses are going to continue to suffer worsening load shedding because of the current conditions and the failure to really make sure everybody pulls together to deal with the problem. So my answer to your question then would be, given that The best thing that businesses and households can do is to reduce their dependence on the grid. And that means getting their own power supplies. And the best option for them would be solar power on the rooftops. And there are new regulations which allow them to do that.
And where does the IPP project conversation now fit in terms of a viable solution in the short-term space?
IPP refers to independent power producers.
Yes.
So these are private sector developers who have the technical capacity and as well as the sites and legal rights in order to build large-scale solar power and wind power plants almost immediately, shovel-ready projects. Those projects need the go-ahead. The financing is there, the sites are there, the conditions are there, grid capacity is available for most of those projects. What needs to happen is they need to be accelerated. That's what needs to happen, and it will initially be a major effort by these independent power producers with the necessary backing to get enough generation capacity on the grid. However, Eskom is also pushing for the right to build renewables, especially where its current coal-fired power plants are. For example, Komati. Eskom has a plan for shutting down Komati and repurposing it. There's a lot of land available, and they could do renewables there. But again, they need the permission and the backing in order to be able to do that. Yeah. All hands on deck. Everybody has to focus. Households and businesses put solar panels on the roof. IPPs build solar power plants and wind power plants wherever they can, where there's grid capacity, and Eskom to be allowed to do what it wants to do. Yes. If I was the president, I would say to Eskom, control this entire project. Coordinate it. We need a center of control. Allow Eskom to do what it should be able to do.
Yeah, because on the one end, Eskom is insisting, despite the criticism, that it's doing everything possible to process the budget quotes for the independent power producers, and that it's working to ensure that they meet those time sets, the deadlines that have been set.
That's correct, but don't forget, all that Eskom can do in that situation is agree to buy the power that is generated by those independent power producers, while on the other hand it tries to keep the old power stations going. What it should be doing is approving a lot more, which is dependent on the government procuring a lot more, and then it can start shutting down the old power stations. South Africans correctly blame Eskom for the lights not being on, but at the same time it's unfair because Eskom can't control the process of procuring new generation capacity. You can shout at Eskom as long as you want to fix the power stations. It's not going to happen to an adequate level of capacity. We need new generation capacity, and that penny doesn't seem to have dropped.